have a start for that. Yeah, we want to keep this as informal as possible. So for those of you in the audience, you have any questions along the way, just feel free to stop us and unmute yourself and ask the questions as well. First off, so that we get to know you and where you're at in this process, just wanted to send in a quick poll to figure out, how familiar you all are with fellowships in general. And it's looking like a majority of you have heard about this to some certain extent. Let's see. So it's great that a lot of y'all seem to have heard of fellowships in some way, or I just wanted to have some more information. And here, that's basically what you said. And let's see. The next question is, how many of you all have actually applied for fellowships before? Or maybe are just looking to refresh your memory as well. So looking like an even split between people who've applied either here at UChicago with another institution or not at all. So great. Hopefully there's a little bit of something here for everybody. To get started, I guess here's this first slide. Our take-home message after today is hopefully that you get to know a little bit more about how to identify fellowship opportunities out there. You're able to be more aware about what they're generally looking for, the general scope of some of these programs, specifically the NIH NRSAs, and then how to go about submitting a winning application and the support systems that are available here at UChicago and around the community. So to first off, if you're not familiar with fellowships, why they're important is because in particular, they're really good on your resume, right? They really bolster your professional reputation. In addition to doing your research and a lot of that training here at UChicago, getting your degree along the way, it also is a way to show the whole world that you're able to pull in your own independent funding. And if some of you are looking to become PIs in the near future, it's great practice for being able to see how you ideate and formulate a winning proposal from just like the concept all the way to identifying collaborators, creating a budget, and also just the actual nitty-gritty, preparing the actual documents. It also allows you to have some financial support so that you have a lot more control over your research directions. It also frees up some of your PI's money, hopefully, to allow you to kind of pursue some of these side projects, or also a lot of these stipends, a lot of these fellowships come with a stipend that's a little bit higher than what you might get just as a standard grad student research fellow here or postdoctoral scholar here. In addition, some of them come with financial support also to allow you to travel to meetings that maybe you've always wanted to go to, but your lab might not be able to support. So overall, really great benefits for young budding researchers as you kind of pursue more independence in your research career. Just to look at the quick numbers at UChicago over this last year, we have about 113 predoctoral fellows. BSD is particularly good at this. I didn't collect the PSD numbers. I know some of you in the audience are from chemistry and physics. And I didn't have access to those numbers, but anyway, among the BSD PhD students, supposedly about 25% of them right now, one out of every four is covered by some sort of fellowship, while it's 5% of PME. Postdocs, it's about the same, similar numbers for these two areas. And of course, MD PhD students, there's some sort of NIH support that comes in to help bring in some internal fellowships for them as well. So that's the number of total students we have, a part of which are also technically fellows. That allows us to free up 10 million of funding from PIs and other sorts of internal grant sources to be able to do more research or to hire additional personnel, technicians and whatnot that help make our community what it is. And this is up to date as of earlier this summer. So who funds the fellowships? This is basically, if you wanted to go and Google like fellowships for pre-docs and postdocs, you'd be able to find a whole pages upon pages of offerings such as these. But most commonly, you're going to see them in terms of like the government, like NIH funds these things called NRSA fellowships, which we'll go in more detail in today. Beth will talk to you a little bit about a workshop they're running shortly that's talking about the NSF's GFRP, so that's the Graduate Research Fellowship. DoD does things like the ND, SEGS, NDSEG. I'll have that on the table shortly. In addition, there's also universities that fund certain programs. So an example for those of you who are in biological sciences or here in PME, you might have heard of T32 programs. This is money that comes from the NIH that allows us to fund a certain number of fellows internally every year. So you're applying to the university for this fellowship slot, and the university gets money from the NIH along the way. There's also some other programs, kind of like foundations affiliated with universities, as well as independent foundations that provide money like this. I'm going to pass this part to Beth because she's got some resources for how you could find fellowships in addition to what I just mentioned.
Thank you. At UChicagoGRAD, we kind of view our mission as twofold. Part of it is trying to help you find the fellowships, and the other part is trying to help you with the process of applying for fellowships. And so a great place to start is our database of fellowships. And on that database, as you can see, you can search by, you can put in your division, the level you're at, if you're a master's or a PhD student, even a postdoc student. If you're looking for a deadline at a particular time of year, you can search with that type of fellowship. That could be, scholarship, fellowship, research fellowship. Sometimes people are looking to go abroad, they can indicate that there. And also eligibility, if you are not a US citizen, you can search, but there are a variety of other eligibilities. And we have about 600 or so fellowships listed on this site. I go to the next slide. This is a site that I really want to promote. I'm hoping Nichole and Anna might be familiar with this site. I find a lot of students are not familiar with this site. And so I'm really happy to be announcing it and putting the link out there. So Pivot is a site that the university has purchased. It's a database that is maintained by Ex Libris, I think. And universities buy into it. So when you log in, you can use your CNET ID to log in. You go into URA's website and you can log in there. And they have billions of dollars in fellowships in there. And so, and there are fellowships of all different kinds. One of the key things to remember when you are searching through Pivot is that there are fellowships that the institution can apply for, fellowships that faculty can apply for, fellowships that postdocs can apply for, fellowships that graduate students can apply for, and even undergraduates. And so you do have to identify what kind of applicant you are in there. You can search by keyword. I encourage you to be creative when you are searching. This is, databases are only as intelligent as we allow them to be. And sometimes you have to be kind of creative, especially if your particular area of expertise. For instance, I was working with somebody recently who studies ion channels. I can guarantee you if you search ion channels, you're not going to get any hits in Pivot. But if you kind of go out a little bit from there and look at the bigger picture, maybe look at the ultimate disease that you might be looking at, you may be able to find some things that relate to what you're using those ion channels to do. So Pivot is just a really great database. You can also, if you find a fellowship in there, and you're afraid you're going to forget it, you can set it up to give you notice. It's also a way, and Nichole and Anna, I don't know if you'll be talking about this later. I understand there are ways we can work in Pivot to find partners for research, but I'm not knowledgeable about that part of things, so I'm not going to address that part. But I really encourage you to check out Pivot. We'll be offering some information sessions about how to use it in the future. Next one. This is our Canvas site, and so we know that searching through sites can sometimes be a little frustrating. And so we've tried to make a little bit of it easier for you by creating this Canvas site. And when you go into the Canvas site, you will see those 9 buttons that are in front of you. And you can take a look and see if there are particular fellowships that we have created. So for instance, in the STEM section, we have a list of fellowships specifically for students in engineering. We also have one that's going to be posted soon for students who are doing physics-related projects, and we're continuing to add to this. Each time you see a description in there, you will see the name of the scholarship, a link to it, a description of it, an indication of whether it funds master's and PhD students or others, or in some cases postdocs, and also whether international students are eligible. We've also tried to organize this in a variety of different ways. So you'll see some fellowships listed in a couple of different places. So under diversity fellowships, you may see some STEM fellowships. Under international students, you'll see some STEM fellowships. And so we provide a variety of different ways that you can look. We also have a newsletter, and I encourage you to sign up for that as well. And you'll see University of Illinois on there. You may wonder why I'm putting another university on there. It's because University of Illinois has full stop, the best graduate fellowship website. They actually employ somebody half-time to do that. And so we're not going to reinvent the wheel and try to do the same thing they are doing. We're just going to say, use their website. It's public, it's free, and you can use it. Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
I hit the wrong button. I kind of clicked the follow the link.
Yes, they are clickable when you're in Canvas. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be sharing these slides to everyone later on. So yeah, you'll be able to click on the links directly in the PDF that you'll get via email. Just to give you a little sampling of some of the most common fellowships that you all apply to. First, for the pre-docs, I think what you're going to find is that, especially for those of us who are biologists and bioengineering, a majority of the predoctoral fellowships that I think that I encounter are usually looking particularly for U.S. citizenship and U.S. citizens and green card holders. But the good news is later on you're going to see in the postdocs that there tends to be a lot wider range of opportunities for those of you all attending today who are not neither U.S. citizens or green card holders. Of course, the NIH and NSF are probably the largest sources of fellowships to those of you today. And the NIH one in particular solicits applications at 3 deadlines every year. These cover a mixture of tuitions, stipend, allowances, including childcare. But you'll see that this is not necessarily the same features covered by some of these other fellowships across the board. So some of them will cover only stipend, but no tuition, such as the Ford Fellowship Program. I think that we have had about 2 or 3 of these at UChicago over the last 10 years. And these segs cover us a subset of these. And then some of them also, if you're a membership, if you're accepted into the fellowship program, you're usually required to do certain things as part of that program. Good examples with the Ford Fellowship and the Hertz Fellowship, where there's certain sorts of conferences that are only for the fellows that you attend every year. Hold on, sorry, actually, that, and then the DoD ones, I think some of them have conferences that you have to attend every year. Usually it's those tend to be really fun conferences because sometimes, in addition to talking about science, they might even bring aboard patients of the types of diseases that your funding program is designed for. So you get to talk to the people who might eventually use the technology or a drug that you're developing. This is usually the case also for postdoctoral fellowships. The NRSAs, again, they cover stipend allowances for postdocs. For those of you who are foreign and not U.S. citizens or green card holders, you're going to see that there's a lot more opportunities with foundations and also within the NIH through the K-99 that do not require citizenship. But at the key thing that differentiates a postdoc fellowship from a pre-doc fellowship is that oftentimes, because a postdoc's like your last step before becoming a PI, you're going to notice that some of them actually come with some sort of research support that allows you to pursue side projects maybe that are not quite within your PI's or your mentor's typical focus. So the nice thing about things like the K-99 and the CASI, I think the Burroughs Wellcome Fund one, I personally applied to these unsuccessfully back then. They're highly competitive as a result of these, but but they allow you really a lot of that ways to develop your independence as a PI. So I'm going to make a really short note about T32 programs today because we have about 20 of these programs here at UChicago. In general, what these are, it's a multi-year grant by the NIH to UChicago to tell us to administer some sort of intra-institutional fellowship program for them. So for example, there's one in cardiovascular biology. I think there's another one in immunology. These are sorts of programs that are, there's a thematic research area and then the program objectives. So things like the classes that you attend or the workshops or the mentorship training, these are all things that are provided by that program for their students. So your application process tends to be either directly to that program or there's some sort of yearly cycle wherein the program administrator emails the affiliated faculty to solicit nominations for those fellowship slots. For the predoctoral programs, what you're going to see is that some of you who are attending to that today who might be, for example, within the community of immunology or cancer biology, you're going to find that your program, your PhD program is actually funded through that T32. So a subset of you are already receiving those fellowships. And so what that means is that every year, whenever a group of students applies to be a part of that PhD program, they're automatically being considered for those training slots. And then anyway, this is just a side note, just because we do have the. I just wanted you to be aware that we have these available, and the proposals and the application process is somewhat similar. But then usually, for those of you who are already here, you're going to hear about them usually through your PI or a mentor right ahead of a nomination. Now, going back to the main part, right before I pass the ball to Anna and Nichole. Just going into the more workflow, right? Now you've identified a fellowship you want to apply for. So how do you go about preparing it? And usually our advice is that you want to start with laying down your project and some of the ideas about at least 3 months before your deadline. And this is where you're kind of figuring out what's my PhD project or what's my side project that I want to package in with this application. You're trying to identify a funding opportunity and announcement, and that's kind of like the placeholder or the call for applications that someone like the NIH might look for. And so after you've identified that through those methods that we just mentioned, you'd be working with your mentor to kind of refine the project a little bit. Generally, it's always great to contact the program managers. Usually when you go to these websites that kind of announce that they've got a fellowship application that a deadline 3 months in the future, it's great to contact that program manager with, just the idea that the ideas that you want to pursue in your research and in your training. And then usually you want to summarize that in a one-page specific aims or plan for them, just kind of like a rough draft, because usually this is not really a waste of time for you, because you're going to end up having to refine that later on for the documents that you'll actually submit as part of your application package. So usually by sending a program manager this one pager, you're able to get a more productive discussion later on about what things that you could probably improve about the application to make it better fit with what a funding agency is looking for. And now on to Anna and Nichole to discuss actually going into the application itself.
Yes, so we kind of put more than 2 months before the deadline, you'll want to notify URA and support systems. And so basically, in general, we'd recommend just kind of notifying URA and or your mentors as soon as possible. So if you know much further out than like 2 months before the deadline, definitely reach out. And you can start to work with the URA Preaward research administrator to who will prepare a checklist for you based on the sponsor and institutional requirements. So it becomes a lot more manageable. They can provide like kind of templates for the administrative documents, so the non science-based documents, and also have you notify your recommendation writers, and can help like in the process of gathering documents. And then in terms of preparing your application, so it kind of notes that URA can provide examples, advice, and that would really be focused on the non-science-based documents, because our role is really one of kind of institutional compliance and kind of grants administration. So we're just heavily involved in kind of like that aspect. So we can definitely provide sponsor templates for like bio sketches and samples and things like that, so that you can kind of see that in more detail. We also have kind of like internal budget templates and budget justification templates as well. That we typically, have to help you kind of craft your budget justification more specifically. And then there's also support available for draft review and advising, and that sounds like it's mainly for kind of the science-based documents, which wouldn't really be so much with URA, but likely with your mentor and advanced lab mates. And then in general, we'd recommend having final documents kind of available for routing, because we have an internal routing process that we have to do through the ORA grant system. So essentially, we'd recommend having final documents about a week or more before the deadline. And we understand that you may need to work on the science kind of up until the proposal is due. So that's okay, but we'd need like a draft of the science. But at that point, we kind of want to have like the budgets done, justifications. And when we're talking about fellowships, it's a little bit more straightforward in terms of like, you know, the budget itself, just because we're not like doing a full-blown like research proposal. So the amounts are pretty much set by the sponsor and institution in terms of whether you're applying for predoctoral or postdoctoral, and whether you have tuition and fees. And so, yeah, so basically the key point is just when you're thinking of submitting something, just reach out to like URA right away. And we'll usually connect you with your pre-award administrator, who typically will work with the faculty member who advises you in PME. So that's usually how we assign GREs and postdocs to an administrator. Next slide. Nichole?
So as Shann mentioned, while there's so many different opportunities out there and different sponsors, today we'll be focusing a little bit more on NIH, as they're the most commonly submitted application types, the NRSA F series. So what exactly are the NIH fellowship grants? They're basically a series of mechanisms, so F30, 31, 32, that provides graduate students and postdoc researchers with educational and training support through that portion of their career. The purpose of the Ruth L. Kirstein National Research Service Awards, which you understand why we call them NRSAs then, or the Kirstein NRSAs, is that's a mouthful. They support the training of biomedical, behavioral, and clinical researchers through individual pre- and postdoctoral fellowships and institutional training grants, which again, Shann had mentioned previously. And so the way that these differ from other NIH awards is it's giving at the various stages of education and training, beginning at the baccalaureate and going through the postdoc level. So you can have something supporting you from a training grant, you know, move into your own predoctoral F31 or F30, sorry, and then move all the way up to, you know, the F32 series and keep on going, you know, moving through your career. Next slide, please. So currently available fellowship opportunities, and these are again the ones there's some others out there, but they really don't fit the need that we're looking to meet right now. So F30 is for the dual degree, the MD PhD, and other dual degree fellowships. F31 is predoctoral as well. That's just standard if you're focusing one way or another. And then F32 is the postdoctoral. Now, mind you, under each one of these, there are multiple funding opportunities for diverse themes, targeted areas. So the links are here in the slide deck so that you can go through and you can see what exactly is available for each one of these mechanisms. As you know, there's quite a few, and it would take up quite a bit of slides to be listing everything. So there is an F33 mechanism, but that's usually for more senior individuals, and it generally has to do with when someone is doing a kind of a pivot in their career and changing their trajectory based on their scientific research. If they're going in another direction, NIH does have that mechanism that allows people to go ahead and take that time to kind of shift their focus scientifically, so that you're not falling behind in any type of funding or whatnot, and to give you that support as you're doing that kind of shift. Next slide, please.
I also wanted to add, there was also some new recent fellowships by the NIH for those of y'all who are, mothers who might want to take time off of your training to kind of pursue, raise a child, or you need to take a delay out of your training. I think there's fellowships now also to allow you to kind of come back after a things like that, like a gap in the career. So NIH is trying to be more supportive and be really respectful of all of these possible interruptions to training. And so, there's definitely beyond the these F fellowships, there's also the K awards that might sometimes cover that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, and then the K series, that typically is when you're going into it's the career development series, and that moves into most often when you're either at the end of your postdoc career and you're moving into the independent researcher phase. That kind of bridges that area between the postdoc phase into the independent research career. So that's a completely different story, different roles, different types of applications. But for this fun, so the fellowship applications, they do have the specific requirements. And these are just a few of the items. Again, there's an exhaustive list, but didn't want to get into everything, but the key points to keep in mind here really is that you have a limited amount of years that you can have this type of support. So pre-docs, you can have up to 5 years aggregate combined between a training grant and a fellowship. So it does cap you out at a certain point. And then postdoc, you may receive up to 3 years aggregate. So again, combination of the training and fellowship. So we have individuals that are on a training grant for a year, and then they come off, or they're planning to come off, and will apply for 2 years of F32 funding to kind of just, again, to fill that gap. you've got to be pursuing research training on a full-time basis. There's the eligibility that Shann had mentioned. We have different variables for pre-doc versus postdoc applicants, where they are in their research career for that stage. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind when we're looking at the funding opportunities, and what you're eyeballing, I guess, to take a look at applying to. Next slide, please. So what exactly is funded under NRSA grants? And I was terrible and I completely omitted the childcare because that is actually a new NIH allowability. So they are being more aware of what's going on in the world today and what people may need, aside from the stipend, tuition, institutional allowance, that kind of stuff. So with the NRSA funding, they have set amounts for everything. So there's a scale for years of experience for postdocs. There's a set rate for stipend for pre-docs. Tuition is generally included mostly for the pre-docs. And while they do have a cap, we stick the entire amount that we would have for an entire year of tuition, just because annually these amounts are updated and we never want to shortchange what we could be receiving from the sponsor. So we always put in our true and actual tuition. They don't ding us. They just award us what they're going to award us at that point. But we still want to get as much as we can. There's a link here for the current rates to show you everything. Again, it's all kind of set in stone for the NIH stuff. Other sponsors allow us to use what our current rates are, what actually we're paying someone in their given department. But NIH is kind of cut and dry. You get this much, period, kind of thing. Again, they update it on an annual basis. While there's a tuition cap for F32s, it doesn't mean that you can't have some tuition allowance in there for the postdoc. That's typically, though, if you're looking at obtaining a master's degree, that's a little bit different from where your PhD or your MD PhD may have been focused area-wise, but it's all there. If you have questions buying this kind of stuff, we're happy to answer. It's not uncommon not to be funded on the initial submission. So I don't want you to be discouraged. This is something I've been telling pre-docs, postdocs, faculty forever and ever, amen kind of thing. We want to get an application in that gets scored and reviewed. And what I mean by scored is that NIH gives you what's called an impact score based on the areas of your application itself. So again, they look at the science first before they even look at what we're asking for budget-wise. Again, the NRSA's, it's set them out. So it's really not, that's really more applicable to research grants. But in terms of this, if we get in, we get scored, we get reviews, that gives you a basis for which to prepare a resubmission application. Or if you completely overhaul it to where it looks like a new application, we go in with that. So getting those reviewer comments is like of the utmost importance. Of course, getting funded on the first shot is amazing, but again, we want to get scored, and pay lines vary from institute to program. So it's not even something that we could kind of ballpark and say, oh, this one, we tend to get more funding from the NCI versus NIGMS, because that would be a lie for me to tell you. It changes every year with the funding allocations to the federal government. So getting it in, getting it reviewed, getting those reviewer comments, that is the ultimate goal for that first round. Next slide, please. So then where to begin? So reviewing the funding opportunity announcement, selecting your appropriate funding opportunity, alerting your mentors and URA. And again, as Anna had mentioned, it's, not when you're absolute 100% going for it, when you're even just thinking, hey, I may go for this in the next round of deadlines. And again, the NRSAs are April 8, August 8, December 8, and they shift depending on if that falls on a weekend, of course. But if you have an idea that you may submit, let us know, because we can give you the checklist. We can give you any information you may want to know or need to know to determine whether or not, yeah, let's go ahead and get this ready for this cycle, or if we want to postpone until next cycle, because we want your application to be strong. We're not going to force you to submit if you don't want to. It's just when you're comfortable and ready and you feel like your application is ready to go. So we will provide you a checklist based on the funding opportunity announcement to tell you, here's the items that are required. Here's the pieces that your Preaward research administrator will work on, as there is a handful of administrative components that completely in our wheelhouse. You're not expected to do any of that stuff. And as Anna mentioned, we do have boilerplates, templates, that kind of thing for some of the standard requirements like bio sketches, resource sharing, that kind of thing. For NRSAs, we do have to have an NIH ERA Commons ID. That is something that's easily set up. We have our Aura Help IT desk that can get that established for you. ORCID accounts is something else that we need that NIH has kind of brought into the fold within the last year or two. So having all that stuff done, and then also the internal requirements. So conflict of interest training. We have our annual ORA COI assurance that must be filed, starting July 1st every year, we have to have a new one filed. And that's anyone who's going to be on any, principal investigator or grant. So you would be considered a PI as the applicant for the postdoc or pre-doc applications. And then completing the city COI training, which is a separate module, but that one, thankfully, you only have to do every 4 years. So once you get that done, you don't have to even think about it for another couple of years. And then I believe this is where I hand it back.
Yeah, so just so you know what a FOA looks like, this is the example of what an NIH funding opportunity announcement looks like. So this is a solicitation officially for an F31 fellowship, the diversity awards in this case. So what you're going to see in particular in a typical NIH FOA is that these are the lists of NIH sub-institutes that fund that will fund F31s for this particular cycle. Nichole already mentioned that each one of these particular institutes might have a separate budget, have a separate pay lines, a separate sort of success rate. So one of the key things that you might want to think about, because normally when you come into URA to tell me, oh, I'm interested in applying for an F31 fellowship, one of the questions that you're going to get back is, do you have any idea about what the target IC or ICs might be? So how you might want to identify the IC or institute or center is basically, number one, you want to look at ways that maybe your research aligns well with the priorities of these particular institutes. I'll go on to that a little bit more in detail in the next slide, but typically a really easy way to select it is, where does your PI get their funding from? So for example, I guess I postdoced for Melody Swartz. She was getting a lot of NCI funding. So it was natural for me to apply for my fellowships through the NCI, because then there was that link between my research and my PI's research. And then you could easily show that whatever I propose is going to have a lot of funding support from my mentor's lab. If, let's say, your PI doesn't have that much NIH fellow funding support and you wanted to look into what the priorities are, there's usually a little link right here at the bottom of the list of ICs where you have the contacts and the requirements for each one of these things. So if you follow that link, what you get is something like this. So for example, some institutes such as the National Eye Institute, they might kind of have very, pretty narrow requirements, and they just kind of link you to another page. Some of them have more kind of like certain sorts of research, such as the NCI looking for basic cancer research or population-based or prevention, So in this case, if it's not clear, let's say you're working on a therapeutics idea, this is one of those cases where that whole one pager about your research idea and your training plan, it's worth it to kind of submit it to this one contact over here to kind of get a gauge for whether or not there's a good alignment between your idea and the program. Of course, some other institutions like the NHLBI, they have a list of a wish list already of things that they're looking to fund. So in general, they're pretty explicit about what they don't fund, such as cancer related stuff or vaccine development. So if, let's say, your idea falls somewhere within this, or it's in the gray area between where maybe you're working in leukemia, or maybe just a project that you think could have applications both in leukemia and, let's say, atherosclerosis. So this might be one of those cases where you might want to contact multiple program officers just to get a gauge for where the best fit might be. And the typical things you might want to ask when you're contacting these program officers ahead of time, this is why it's really worth it to start like more than a month in advance, because that allows you to really talk to a lot of these guys to figure out what they're looking to fund that year. Things that you might want to ask, for example, are things like, some of these institutes, technically NRSAs are supposed to fund just based off of the scientific idea and not whether or not you want to become a PI in academia down the line. But in practice, because these program officers are the ones who are also managing the review committee, they could also give you some advice as to whether or not the reviewers have a tendency to bias towards applicants who want to have a career in academia versus more open-minded. Some of the things that you might want to ask, obviously these guys tend to have a little bit of conflict of interest, right? Because they have their interests in serving like the government, trying to make sure that only the best ideas and applications get funded. But at the same time, they got to be transparent to every single applicant as to what makes a good application. So typically, whenever we enter these kinds of phone calls, one of the things you want to be asking is things like, how would this idea be received by the peer reviewers, or how would my training plan if I incorporate this aspect, such as, let's say, entrepreneurship training with Polski, how would this be received by the peer reviewers? You could also take this opportunity to get a little bit more of a gauge as to the funding rates and the application success rates, because these tend to be pretty difficult to find if you kind of search the NIH's websites. Sometimes if you have really poor alignment with the guy that you contacted, they might be able to suggest to you other ICs that might be expanding their scope, or other opportunities that might better align with your idea. So, it's always best to get an idea of this in case you're seeing that the call's not really quite going very well, and that they might not be interested at all. And then back to Nichole and Anna.
Thanks. So URA pre-award opt-in services. So we kind of touched on some of these points earlier. So pre-award opt-in services is a team of pre-award research administrators who provide pre-award support for opt-in partners across campus at the University of Chicago. So in this case, the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering is one of our opt-in partners. And so these services include support for proposal development, pre-proposals, letters of intent, just-in-time requests, assistance navigating sponsor policies and interpreting guidelines. And so essentially, my team handles everything that happens prior to award stage. So that's essentially what we're here for. And the support is designed to handle administrative aspects of like the pre-award process, proposal development process, so that faculty and researchers can focus on the scientific and technical content of their proposals and work, so that basically they're not bogged down by the administrative and compliance requirements. So basically, URA pre-award opt-in handles kind of all the administrative kind of compliance requirements. Next slide. So basically, we kind of went over this before. Notify your mentors, and URA pre-award research administrator of your intentions to apply to a funding opportunity as soon as possible. You can always feel free to like reach out to even me or like Nichole if you're not sure who to contact, and we can make sure that you get to the right person. So at proposal stage, your pre-award research administrator will review the funding opportunity announcement for sponsor requirements and basically confirm your eligibility to submit to the opportunity. If there are like questions regarding kind of like citizenship status or like visa requirements, that could be a case that we might have to like escalate further internally. But in general, we can basically read the FOA, and if you give us the accurate information, we can help you like confirm whether you're eligible. We provide a checklist of required proposal documents, including a timeline of just kind of when we need things. We address any issues regarding limited submissions. So for example, if you were submitting maybe a fellowship opportunity that only had a certain number of applications permitted throughout the entire institution, that would basically be called a limited submission. And so internally at the university, we would have to work with research development support to secure the internal approval slot. So this is a different situation than what we're dealing with, with NIH, because with NIH, it's basically if you're eligible, it's possible to apply, and kind of if your mentor, supports you in that. And then we prepare and/or edit proposal budgets and justifications with the PI or researcher. So that might be even more kind of relevant for you as you're kind of, moving along in your career, and maybe even outside of kind of the fellowship context, but just in terms of like proposal development. We also collect the appropriate documentation for submission. So like if we, were to ever, move forward with a different application type and have kind of like, an outgoing subaward or subcontractor, we would connect with that third party to basically, provide them with the required documents that they need to submit, like the list of documents and basically the guidelines they need to follow. And then we complete the non-technical proposal components. So, updating current and pending support when that's applicable, verifying your bio sketch or CV with you to make sure that's accurate. We also seek internal approval. So anything, internally that would have to be approved outside, you know, before we can move forward, we basically would provide, you know, like work with another department to obtain cross-departmental approval, obtain cost share approval if that was something that factored in. Most likely, I would say that's probably not going to be the case with fellowships, but just something to kind of let you know, like what we do. We also ensure that all institutional compliance requirements are met. So essentially, you know, ensuring that we kind of basically meet those like COI requirements that Nichole mentioned, COI city training requirements, for example. We have like some institutional policies as well around research. So, you know, that's a separate topic, but, you know, just know that we do have like institutional compliance things that we have to meet. We create and complete the ORA grants funding proposal because that's essentially the system of record. So anytime you're applying for sponsored funding, so basically external funding outside of the university, basically would want to make sure you touch base with us so that we can kind of help you apply for that, because we have to enter all of this into our grant system before we can submit the proposal. We upload all the proposal documents and route to the assigned department approver. We send the final PDF of the proposal to the PI or researcher for final review. And then we submit the proposal once it receives all of the you know, institutional approval, review, endorsement, and then once it receives the PI or researcher's final approval. Next slide. So I think Beth.
I think that's me. But, is that it? Okay, so well, thanks so much, and I learned so much from hearing about what you guys are doing in URA pre-award, and I think that in many ways we are UChicagoGRAD is a potential complement to some of what you would be doing, in particular if you're applying for NIH awards. So just to offer a quick clarification, that the list that Shann showed you earlier of a variety of different awards, most awards that you would apply for STEM do not require you to go through URA and pre-award. However, anything from NIH will. And so, and one of the things that we can do in UChicagoGRAD is to assist you with an NIH award or any other kind of award that you are interested in applying for. So what can we do? We can give you individualized meetings to discuss strategy. I regularly have students reach out to me and they want to talk about how to approach an award or whether they should apply for an award, or do I know anything about, you know, their particular circumstances and does this fit a particular award? So I'm always happy to have those discussions with students. I also can do one-on-one meetings with students to review drafts. Just before I came here, I just reviewed an NSF SBE 13-page document. Actually didn't do it just before I came here. I met with somebody to discuss it, but she is applying, and that's one of the NSF awards where you apply directly as opposed to one of the ones where you go through URA. So it depends sometimes even on the particular award that you are applying for. But I do meet with students who submit their drafts to me, usually in advance of our meetings, and I can give them feedback. In some cases, we do have samples of past successful applications for a particular award that students have volunteered for us to share with UChicago students, and we can share those with you. We also have a really great writing consultant who provides virtual feedback. She doesn't meet with students, but you can submit your documents to her through a WUFU form, and you can get feedback from her that way. In fact, you can go back and forth between the two of us. So if you want to share a draft with me and then the next draft you want to share with her, that works fine too. We do writing workshops, and we have started organizing some independent writing groups at a student's request. We do fellowship information sessions about particular awards. I do have to admit we kind of stay away from NIH. We don't usually do fellowship information sessions on those. You guys are doing a great job of getting that information out there. But we do we will work with giving you feedback on NIH applications, most definitely. We have a monthly STEM newsletter that you can subscribe for that will tell you about different fellowships, and we also try to profile students who have won, so you get a sense that there are actual winners out there. And if any of you were to be applying for anything which involved an interview, we do have someone at UChicagoGRAD who can help you with the process of applying. making an appointment to talk to me or to attend one of the sessions that I might be leading or somebody else might be leading, you can do that through the link that I've provided there. And I've just done a screenshot of the screen that you would go into to do that. Next slide.
Man, I really wish I had access to those interviews back when I applied for one of these fellowships, because I had one fellowship that had interviews.
Yes, interviews can throw people off. That is for sure. We've actually arranged mock interviews for students very frequently. If you want a mock interview, I know, and I work really closely with our careers team. They do mock interviews, practice interviews all the time, and we are most happy to do that. I wanted to add, and I know we're kind of getting to the end of our time today, and I don't want to take too much time because you're going to get these lists here, but I've offered some guidance, and I would love to hear Nichole and Anna's thoughts on this, of kind of writing guidance for the NIH application from the 10,000 feet out level, and then some more detailed information on the next slide. But it sounds like sort of between our offices, you can get a lot of different feedback on sort of, you may be able to see samples. I think as far as details go, definitely, oh, I see a typo on there. Scope of proposal is feasibly. That should be feasible, but feasibility is a big thing that you're always going to be assessed about. And you also want to make sure that, you're just kind of, when you're applying for these grants, what you want to do is make sure that you have read that solicitation over and over. In some cases, what you might want to do is break down the different pieces of it, put them on a piece of paper in front of you, and don't let yourself stop until you've written something that covers each issue, or going through the draft that you write. If your process is more, you just need to write it down, then go through the solicitation, see, have I covered this? Have I covered this? Have I covered this? And if you've covered it, it's not enough to just say you've covered it. You really want it to be very well integrated. You want to make sure that, for instance, when you are talking about scope, and your project is something that is feasible. Scope involves so many different things. Feasibility is not just how much time it takes. It also has to do with your expertise. It has to do with the expertise of your mentoring team. And so feasibility is something that is assessed in a variety of different ways. And you want to just make sure that that's absolutely clear. Novelty is something that they are always looking for. And where is the novelty in your proposal? Of course, it should be a novel concept that hasn't been investigated before, but are you bringing a novel approach to it? Are you using new methodologies? Are you using new instrumentation? And making sure that the novelty is coming through clearly. It's very easy to take some of this stuff for granted, but definitely make sure you're looking at the solicitation, and then also looking at how you get evaluated. You'd be surprised sometimes. I'm not sure that they say a whole lot about novelty in the solicitation, but when you look in the evaluation criteria, you will see something about novelty. So make sure you're kind of immersing yourself in this, in the NIH when you are applying for it. I'll let people go ahead and review some of the guidance that we've offered at their leisure. And yeah, next slide.
And of course, just make use of your peers. We're a great community here of like really top-notch people. It's really easy to find who's in the past have successfully gotten these fellowships just by looking at the NIH's reporter website. You could easily search like the type of fellowship you're applying for, and the University of Chicago, and you will see that basically there's at least there's 44 people active with fellowships right now from the in an form of an F31. We've actually, I want to move quickly to the question and answer, so you get a chance to answer your questions. And we're actually we've invited two of our current fellows, Margo MacDonald, who's got an NCI F31 Predoctoral fellowship, and Peter Deak, who's got the F32 Postdoctoral fellowship, here to come with us to address some of your questions. So, and here are our contacts for you as well. Feel free to email any of us if you have any questions. And again, I'm going to provide these slides to all of you at the end of the session. So let me find Margo to spotlight you, and Peter. And so, yeah, please feel free to just unmute yourself to ask any of your questions you might have. Anybody?
Maybe someone who deals with NIH fellowships in particular could give some thoughts about sort of timing in the sort of more zoomed out. We talked about the timeline of actually submitting an application, but there's also the timeline kind of within years for when an application should go in. I understand that for postdocs, for some NIH fellowships, you can sort of age out of eligibility or sort of age out of prime eligibility. On the other hand, often people don't know how long their remaining time in their research position is going to extend, but they also want to have a strong application based on preliminary data and a sort of initial strong training record or set of letters. So maybe you could sort of talk about the balance there and when's kind of the right time.
So as a postdoc, I'm assuming you're a postdoc as well. I would just say apply whenever you can, however many times you can. They don't really frown on that. Like if you have a weak application, they'll just tell you that's a weak application, try harder next time. But you have opportunities to reapply. Mine actually got just under the pay line the first time I applied, but they didn't tell me until I was about to resubmit the revision. But the revision process doesn't take that long, and once you have a foundation of an application, you can always revise it and improve it. So I would just say, as soon as you possibly can, identify co-mentors, letter writers, have a good project framework in mind. But even if you have any preliminary results at all, just submit, because the feedback that you receive really helps a lot.
I think from my personal experience, I agree with Peter a lot here. I guess earlier on, we have these T32 programs in-house that I think your PI could help nominate you for them in-house, and then that gives you a little bit of an internal fellowship that you could put on a resume. But I think my first F32 fellowship application came at year 2 of my postdoc, which didn't get funded. I was kind of spending quite a bit more time collecting the preliminary data than I think I played with the whole aging out at year 4, year 5 of my postdoc with the K99. I ultimately didn't get any of these, but I think you're right that usually the age cutoff is around 4 years to 5 years after your terminal PhD or MD degree, right? So it's definitely, I think it's really worth it to apply it really earlier on, year 1, year 2 even.
Yeah, I would echo that for the predoctoral award as well. I would say pretty much as soon as you have enough preliminary data to apply for it, go for it. Just because, yeah, most people don't get it on the first try, and it's kind of a long process. Finding out if you got it the first time around, or getting your review, submitting it, you have to wait months before you can do it again. So I think it's best to just assume you won't get it on your first try, and if you do, that's awesome. But if you don't, then you'll have time to reapply while you still have a decent amount of grad school left to be funded. So for me, I applied sort of towards the end of my second year. Once I'd joined my lab, I'm co-advised, joined 2 labs. I defended my qualifying exam and passed that, and some preliminary data, and I was about to come off of I was on a T32 grant for my first couple of years of grad school. So that was ending. So I wanted to look into getting some other funding. But yeah, I would just say as soon as you can, start thinking about it, because it's one that you can reapply for if you don't get it, and they give you feedback and stuff, but it takes a while to get that feedback.
Oh, and I think most of us who've kind of received some sort of feedback from the NIH, I think, for example, myself, I could share with you an example of one of those sheets. It's actually really detailed, the amount of feedback you get on them. So that's why we really highly recommend applying as early as possible. Any other questions there? You're really quite much today. Oh, I guess I could turn off recording as well.